Have you ever watched your parents hand a stranger photos of a house you bought with your own sweat, claiming it as family property? They sat there with confident smiles, telling the attorney I was just a child learning responsibility, completely unaware that the deed was sitting heavy in my bag. I stayed silent, waiting for the man in the suit to ask the single question that would shatter their delusion forever. My name is Harper Callahan, and as I walked into the plush, climate-controlled reception area of Hargrove Estate Planning, I felt less like a client and more like a prop in a play I had explicitly refused to audition for. The air conditioning was humming at a low, expensive frequency, the kind of silence that usually costs $300 an hour to maintain. My parents, Evelyn and Grant Callahan, were already seated in the conference room when I arrived, and they looked perfectly at home. They always did. They had that specific brand of middle-class American confidence that allowed them to walk into any room and immediately begin rearranging the furniture, both literally and metaphorically. I stood in the doorway for a second, adjusting the strap of my leather tote bag on my shoulder. It was heavy, not just with my laptop, but with a single manila envelope that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Harper, darling, finally," my mother said, waving a manicured hand as if she were shooing away a fly. "Come sit. We were just telling Mr. Hargrove about the summer property." I took the seat across from the man who was supposed to be helping them secure their legacy. Mason Hargrove was a man in his late 50s, wearing a suit that was tailored sharply enough to cut glass. He had the look of someone who had heard every variation of a family lie possible and was currently bored by the lack of creativity in this one. He looked up at me, his eyes narrowing slightly behind rimless glasses. He did not smile. He just nodded, a professional acknowledgement of my existence that felt refreshingly cold compared to the suffocating warmth coming from my parents. "Miss Callahan," Mason said, "thank you for joining us." "I was told my presence was mandatory for the beneficiary paperwork," I said, keeping my voice neutral. I sat down, placing my bag on the floor next to my boots. I did not take off my coat. I wanted to be ready to leave. "Beneficiary, trustee, it is all semantics, really, isn't it?" My father, Grant, boomed with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. He leaned back in the leather chair, spreading his arms wide as if he were physically encompassing the room. "The important thing is that the family assets are protected. That is what we are here for. Stewardship." On the polished mahogany table sat a large, leather-bound photo album. My stomach turned over. It was the album I had seen my mother curating over the last 3 years. She had brought it here today as evidence. "Look at this view, Mr. Hargrove," my mother said, flipping the heavy page open to a centerfold spread of the lake house. "This is the deck Grant and I decided on last spring. We wanted something that really opened up to the water. It is the heart of the home, truly." I looked at the photo upside down. It was indeed a beautiful deck. I remembered it well because I remembered the 3 weeks of overtime I worked to pay the contractor, and the fight I had with the zoning board to get the permit approved. I remembered writing the check for $12,400. My parents had decided on it in the sense that they had sat on the old, rotting wood, drinking iced tea, and remarked that someone should really fix it. When I fixed it, it became their vision. "It looks magnificent," Mason said, though his tone was flat. He wasn't looking at the photos anymore. He was looking at my parents, and then flicking his gaze over to me. He was trying to reconcile the narrative. "So, this property is currently the primary asset you wish to place into the revocable living trust?" "Exactly," my father said, leaning forward and clasping his hands on the table. "The Cedar Ridge property is the crown jewel of the Callahan family. We want to ensure it stays in the bloodline. You know how it is. We want to make sure Harper here has access to it, of course, but under the right guidance. She is 34, still finding her footing in some ways." I stared at the wall. 34. I was a senior consultant at a logistics firm. I managed a team of 40 people. I had a credit score of 820. But in this room, under the narrative weight of Grant and Evelyn Callahan, I was a wayward teenager who needed an allowance. "I see," Mason said, He picked up a pen and tapped it rhythmically against his legal pad. "And the intention is to transfer the title from your names into the trust, designating Harper as a conditional beneficiary? Meaning she gets usage rights only if she adheres to certain family stipulations?" "Precisely," my mother chimed in, her voice dripping with maternal concern. "We just want to protect her from herself. She works so hard. She forgets what matters. If we put the house in the trust, we manage the taxes, the upkeep decisions, and she can just enjoy it. Eventually, when she is ready to settle down." It was a masterclass in gaslighting. If I hadn't lived the last 5 years of my life, even I might have believed them. They spoke with such conviction. They genuinely believed that because I was their daughter, everything I touched was an extension of them. My salary was family success, my car was our transport, and my house, my beautiful, quiet sanctuary on the lake, was our legacy. I remained silent. I had learned a long time ago that interrupting them only gave them fuel. They would spin my protests as emotional outbursts, further proof that I was unstable and needed their guidance. So I let them dig. I let them shovel the dirt of their deception until the pile was so high they couldn't see over it. Mason stopped tapping his pen. He shifted in his chair, a subtle movement that signaled a change in the atmosphere. He was a professional. He dealt with wealthy families, with old money, with complex estates, and something about 2 middle-class retirees claiming ownership of a pristine lakefront property while their daughter sat in stone-cold silence was triggering his alarm bells. "Mr. and Mrs. Callahan," Mason started, his voice dropping an octave, becoming more serious. "You have described the emotional value of the home very well. The sentimental attachment is clear. However, for me to draft the trust instrument today, we need to move past the sentiment to the mechanics." "We are ready," my father said, nodding vigorously. "Let's get it done." "The mechanics of funding a trust are specific," Mason continued, his eyes locking onto my father's face. "You cannot simply declare a property is in a trust. The title must be legally transferred. A new deed must be recorded with the county." Right, paperwork." My father waved his hand dismissively. "We can sign whatever needs signing." Mason paused. He looked at me again. I held his gaze. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I just waited. "Miss Callahan." Mason addressed me directly for the first time since the greeting. "You have been very quiet. Your parents are proposing a structure where they retain control of the property as trustees, and you have limited access until their passing, provided you meet certain conduct clauses. Are you in agreement with this arrangement?" "Harper understands that this is for the best." My mother answered for me, reaching out to pat my hand. I pulled my hand away before she could make contact. The rejection was sharp, and for a second, her smile faltered. "I am asking Miss Callahan," Mason said, his voice sharpening. He held up a hand to stop my mother from speaking again. "I am listening," I said calmly. "I am very interested to hear how this transfer is supposed to work." Mason looked back at my parents. The wariness in his eyes had hardened into suspicion. "To prepare the deed transfer, I need to know the current vesting. Who is currently on the title? Is it joint tenancy? Community property?" "It is family property," my mother said, her smile tightening at the edges. "We handled the acquisition. It is all under the family umbrella." "That is not a legal term." "Mrs. Callahan," Mason said. He leaned forward. "I need to ask a direct question before we proceed any further. Who will be signing the grant deed to move this property into the trust? And who will be providing the evidence of the source of funds for the purchase to satisfy the anti-money laundering protocols?" My father cleared his throat. "Well, money is money, isn't it? We have all pitched in. It is a pot, the family pot." "So you are saying you provided the funds for the purchase?" Mason pressed. "We facilitated it," my mother said quickly, her voice rising in pitch. She reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a chaotic stack of papers. "I have utility bills here. See? The electric bill, the gas bill. We have been paying these when we stay there. That proves residency. That proves ownership in the eyes of the common law. Surely." She pushed the crumpled stack of utility bills across the mahogany table. It was pathetic. It was a stack of reminders that they had stayed in my house for free, used my electricity, and occasionally left a check on the counter to cover their share, which they were now presenting as proof of ownership. Mason didn't touch the bills. He looked at them with a mixture of confusion and professional offense. Mrs. Callahan, paying a utility bill does not convey real estate title. It shows intent, my father argued, his face turning a shade of red that matched the spine of the photo album. Harper, tell him how we found the place, how we advised you on the location. That is equity. That is intellectual equity. Intellectual equity, Mason repeated, the words tasting like vinegar in his mouth. It was time. I reached down to my tote bag. The sound of the zipper opening was loud in the sudden silence of the room. My parents stopped talking. They looked at me, expecting me to pull out a tissue, or perhaps a checkbook to pay their retainer. Instead, I pulled out the manila envelope. It was thin, but it felt heavy as a slab of granite. I placed it on the table. I didn't slide it. I set it down with a deliberate, flat thud that resonated through the wood. Harper, what is that? My mother asked, her voice trembling slightly. She knew, deep down, past the layers of delusion and entitlement, she knew exactly what was in there. I opened the clasp and slid the documents out. They were crisp, clean, and undeniable. This, I said, my voice steady, cutting through the humidity of their lies, is the grant deed, recorded with the county recorder's office in Cedar Ridge, Missouri, 3 years ago. I pointed to the line at the top. And this, I continued, placing the second document on top of it, is the settlement statement from the closing, showing the wire transfer of $450,000 originating from my personal brokerage account, not a family pot, not a joint account, mine. I looked at Mason Hargrove. You asked who would be signing the transfer into the trust. The answer is no one, because the only person with the legal authority to sign that deed is me. And I did not authorize this meeting. I did not authorize this trust. And I certainly did not authorize my parents to present my home as their asset. Mason looked down at the documents. He picked up the deed, his eyes scanning the recording stamp, the parcel number, and finally, the name of the grantee. Harper J. Callahan, a single woman. He looked at the settlement statement. He saw the wire confirmation. He saw the source of funds. He looked up at my parents. The polite, patient attorney was gone. In his place was a man who realized he had almost been made an accessory to fraud. Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, Mason said, his voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze water. This document states that Harper is the sole owner in fee simple. There are no co-owners. There are no liens held by you. But we are her parents, my father sputtered, the confidence draining out of him like air from a punctured tire. It is the same thing. What is hers is ours. That is how families work. That is not how the law works. Mr. Callahan, Mason said. He set the paper down and looked at me. Miss Callahan, these documents appear authentic. They are, I said. You can run a title search right now. It will take you 5 minutes. My mother let out a scoff, a sharp, wounded sound. Harper, you are embarrassing us. In front of a stranger, after everything we have done for you. We are just trying to protect your future. No, I said, looking her dead in the eye. You are trying to steal my present. The silence that followed was absolute. My father looked at the album of the house he pretended to own. My mother looked at the lawyer she tried to trick. And Mason Hargrove looked at me, realizing that the uninvited play I had walked into was actually a crime scene, and I had just brought the smoking gun. Mason Hargrove did not just look at the papers I had placed on the table, he dissected them. The polite country club demeanor he had worn only minutes ago evaporated, replaced by the clinical, shark-like focus of a man who realized his liability insurance might be on the line. He picked up the grant deed, holding it up to the light as if checking for a watermark, his eyes scanning every line of the legal description. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. I could hear the faint hum of the server stack in the corner and the wet, nervous sound of my father swallowing. "This is a recorded instrument," Mason said, his voice devoid of any warmth. He placed the deed back down, smoothing it flat with his hand. "Dated October 14th, 2021. Grantee is Harper J. Callahan. Status is sole ownership. No rights of survivorship listed. No tenants in common." He looked up, his gaze bypassing my parents entirely and landing on me. "Miss Callahan, according to this, you have held fee simple title since the day of closing. There have been no subsequent filings, no quitclaim deeds, adding your parents to the title that perhaps were not recorded immediately?" "None," I said. My voice was steady, surprising even me. "I am the only person who has ever held title to that property since the previous owner sold it." My father let out a sharp, derisive laugh. It was a sound I knew well, the sound he made when he wanted to make someone feel small for stating a fact he did not like. "Now, hold on a minute, Mason," Grant said, leaning forward until his chest pressed against the edge of the mahogany table. "You are getting hung up on the paperwork. We told you. Harper is on the deed for logistical reasons, credit scores, interest rates, that sort of thing. But in this family, we operate on trust. We operate on reality. Not just what some clerk at the county office typed up. That house is Callahan property. It belongs to the family trust because the family is the entity that matters. The law does not recognize family vibes as a form of ownership. Dad," I said, cutting him off before he could launch into one of his speeches about the collective good. "Do not speak to your father that way," my mother snapped, her eyes wide with performative shock. "Mason, surely you understand. There is legal ownership, and then there is equitable ownership. We have poured our hearts into that place. We picked out the curtains in the guest room. We planted the hydrangeas out front. Does that count for nothing?" Mason took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked tired. "Mrs. Callahan, picking out curtains creates an aesthetic interest, not a property interest. In the state of Missouri, and indeed anywhere in the United States, real property is governed by the statute of frauds. Transfers must be in writing. Ownership is determined by the title." He put his glasses back on and looked at my father. "Mr. Callahan, you are asking me to draft a trust that conveys a property you do not legally own. You are asking me to take an asset that belongs to Harper and place it under your control as trustees. Unless Harper signs a deed transferring the property to you or to the trust directly, I cannot do that. It would be invalid. Worse, it would be fraud." The word hung in the air. Fraud. My father recoiled, as if he had been slapped. "We are not criminals. We are parents. We are trying to secure our daughter's future because she clearly does not understand how to manage an asset of this magnitude. I manage assets of far greater magnitude every single day," I said, my voice low. "I manage logistics chains for Fortune 500 companies. I think I can handle a 3-bedroom lake house." My mother turned her chair to face me, blocking Mason out. She reached for my hand again, but I kept them firmly in my lap. She adopted the look she used to wear when I was 10 years old and refused to hug a distant relative I didn't like. "Harper, look at me," she pleaded, her voice trembling with a weaponized fragility. "Why are you doing this? Why are you humiliating us? Think about everything we have done for you. The piano lessons when you were 7, the way we drove you to soccer practice every Tuesday. We sacrificed our weekends, our savings, our whole lives to make you successful. And now, when we just want to have a place for the family to gather, a place that is safe, you wave a piece of paper in our faces like a weapon." It was a brilliant performance. It almost worked. For a split second, the old conditioning kicked in. The deep, programmed guilt that said I owed them my breath, my blood, and my bank account because they had performed the basic duties of parenting 3 decades ago. But then I looked at the deed on the table. I let my mind drift back to the day I bought the house. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't a handout. I remembered sitting in the title company office in Cedar Ridge. It was a rainy Tuesday in October. I had just finished the colossal Project Horizon consultation, a job that had nearly killed me. For 6 months, I had worked 80-hour weeks, sleeping in airports, eating vending machine sandwiches, fixing a supply chain disaster for a client who yelled at me every morning at 6 o'clock. I had missed my best friend's engagement party. I had developed a tremor in my left eyelid from stress. When that bonus check cleared, $120,000 after tax, I didn't buy a luxury car. I didn't go to Europe. I took every cent I had saved for 10 years, combined it with that bonus, and I bought the lake house. I remembered the cramp in my hand as I signed the mountain of closing documents. I remembered the title agent, a kind woman named Sarah, handing me the keys and saying, "Congratulations, it is all yours." I had driven to the house that night, alone. I sat on the floor of the empty living room, eating a pizza, listening to the rain hit the roof. I had cried, not out of sadness, but out of relief. For the first time in my life, I was standing on ground that no one could pull out from under me. It was the one place where I didn't have to be grateful to anyone but myself. "I am not doing this to you," I said to my mother, pulling myself back to the cold reality of the law office. "You are doing this to yourselves. You told a lawyer you owned my house. You lied." "We did not lie," my father shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "We simplified." Mason stood up. The motion was abrupt, signaling the absolute end of the consultation. "Mr. Callahan, Mrs. Callahan," Mason said, his voice sharp and final. "We are done for today." "But the trust," my mother started. "There will be no trust drafted by this firm today." Mason interrupted. He gathered the papers I had brought, but then hesitated and pushed them back toward me. He didn't want to hold them. They were radioactive. "I have an ethical obligation to ensure that the assets listed in any estate plan are verified. Given the significant discrepancy between your verbal representations and the legal documentation Miss Callahan has provided, I must pause all work." He looked at me. "Miss Callahan, I am going to order an official title search through the county recorder's office. I need to see the chain of title with my own eyes. Directly from the source, I need to see if there are any other claims, liens, or unrecorded instruments that might support your parents' assertions." "You won't find any," I said, standing up and sliding the deed back into my envelope. "If the title search confirms what your documents show," Mason continued, turning back to my parents, "then I cannot proceed with placing this property into your trust without a signed deed of transfer from Harper. And if you attempt to find another attorney to do this without disclosing the true ownership, I would strongly advise against it. That path leads to serious legal exposure." "You are firing us?" my father asked, incredulous. He looked like a king who had been told his crown was made of Burger King cardboard. "I am pausing representation pending verification of facts," Mason corrected. "Good day." I didn't wait for my parents. I didn't wait for the inevitable explosion of accusations. I turned on my heel and walked out of the conference room, past the receptionist who looked up with wide eyes, likely having heard my father's shouting through the soundproof glass. The walk to the elevator felt like floating. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of adrenaline and fear, but my legs were steady. I hit the lobby button and watched the numbers count down. 3, 2, 1. The doors opened, and I stepped out into the bright, harsh sunlight of the parking lot. The air was hot, a stark contrast to the chilled air of the office. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with oxygen that didn't smell like old money and lies. I reached my car, a sensible sedan that I had also paid for myself, and unlocked the door. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, a text message from Logan. My brother, the peacekeeper, the one who always wanted everyone to just get along because it was easier for him if the boat wasn't rocking, even if I was the one drowning to keep it steady. Logan, what are you doing? Mom just called me. She is crying. Dad is screaming something about you betraying the family legacy. They said you ruined the meeting with the lawyer. Are you crazy? Just let them have their win. I stared at the screen. Let them have their win. That was the family motto. Let them win. Harper, let them take credit. Harper, let them rewrite history. Harper. I didn't reply. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. I knew exactly what was happening inside that office building. My parents were likely trying to convince Mason that I was mentally unstable, or that the deed was a forgery, or that I had manipulated them. They were scrambling. But Mason Hargrove wasn't a family friend they could charm. He was a lawyer who had just realized he had almost walked into a malpractice suit. I started the engine. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I knew this wasn't over. Mason would run the title search. He would call me in a few days, and when he confirmed that I was right, that I was the undeniable sole owner, he would have to tell my parents no in a way they couldn't spin. That phone call wouldn't be a resolution. It would be the declaration of war. And for the first time in 34 years, I had the ammunition to fight back. 3 days. That was exactly how long it took for the fuse I lit in Mason Hargrove's office to burn all the way down to the powder keg. I spent those 3 days in a state of hypervigilance. Every time my phone buzzed, my shoulders seized, I went to work. I sat in meetings. I approved shipping manifests, but my mind was entirely elsewhere. I was waiting for the gavel to drop. It happened on a Thursday afternoon at 2:15. I was in the break room making a coffee when my cell phone rang. The caller ID displayed Hargrove Estate Planning. I let it ring twice, taking a deep breath to steady my voice before sliding the green icon across the screen. "This is Harper," I said. "Miss Callahan, this is Mason Hargrove." His voice was different. Gone was the polite, tentative tone from our meeting. In its place was the clipped, sterile cadence of a man who had just looked into an abyss of liability and was actively backing away. "Mr. Hargrove," I said, "I assume the title search is complete?" "It is," he replied. "I received the abstract from the county recorder in Missouri this morning. The report confirms your documentation in full. You are the sole fee simple owner of the property at Cedar Ridge Lake. There are no other interests recorded. No trust, no parents, just you." I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the cool glass of the break room window. Even though I knew it, I had paid for the house. I paid the taxes. I held the keys. Hearing a third party confirm it felt like oxygen rushing into a sealed room. "Thank you for confirming," I said. "Miss Callahan, I have a duty to ask you one final question before I close this file." Mason said. The rustle of papers came through the line. "Do you, at this time, authorize the transfer of this property into the Callahan Family Trust, designating your parents as trustees with control over the asset?" "No," I said. The word was small, but it was solid. "I do not authorize it. I never did." "Understood," Mason said. There was a pause, a heavy silence that lasted for 5 seconds. "I have just drafted a letter to your parents. I am terminating my representation of them regarding this estate plan effective immediately. I am also noting in my internal files that there was a material misrepresentation of assets during the intake process. I cannot be party to the creation of a trust funded by assets the grantors do not own. It crosses a line from optimism into something else." "Fraud?" I suggested. Mason didn't say the word. He didn't have to. "I am ceasing all work. Good luck, Miss Callahan." The line went dead. I put the phone down on the counter. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what had just happened. I had just fired my parents. 10 minutes later, the storm hit. My phone lit up. "Mom." I ignored it. It lit up again immediately. "Mom." I flipped the phone face down. Then a text from my father. "Answer the phone." Then another call. "Mom." By 5 o'clock, I had 37 missed calls and a string of text messages that ranged from confused to apocalyptic. They weren't worried about me. They were panicked. They had just lost their lawyer. But more importantly, they had lost control of the narrative. I drove home in silence, taking the long way, trying to delay the inevitable, but I knew they wouldn't just let this go over the phone. I lived in a secure apartment complex on the north side of the city. It had a gate code and a heavy front door. I thought I was safe. I was wrong. When I stepped out of the elevator on the 4th floor, they were already there. My father was pacing the hallway, his face a mottled red. My mother was leaning against my doorframe, weeping into a tissue that looked dry, and standing between them, looking like a man facing a firing squad, was my older brother, Logan. "You!" my father shouted the moment he saw me. "What did you say to him? What did you tell Mason?" I didn't run. I didn't flinch. I walked toward them, keys in hand. I told him the truth. Dad, I told him he couldn't put my house in your trust because it is not your house. "It is all the same," he roared, his voice echoing off the hallway walls. A neighbor's door cracked open down the hall, then quickly shut. "We are a family. You do not go behind our backs and sabotage a legal strategy." "I didn't go behind your back," I said, jamming my key into the lock. "You dragged me to that office to sign away my property. That was the sabotage." I pushed the door open and tried to step inside, intending to slam it shut, but Logan stuck his foot in the jamb. "Harper, wait," Logan said. His voice was pleading, thin and reedy. "Just let us come in. Please, Mom is having palpitations. We just need to talk this out." I looked at my brother. He was 36 years old, a vice principal at a high school. Yet he stood there holding the door open for the people who were attacking me, thinking he was helping. "Fine," I said. 5 minutes?" They poured into my living room like a toxic spill. My father didn't sit. He marched to the window. My mother collapsed onto my sofa, the sofa I bought, and let out a fresh wail. "He fired us. Harper," she sobbed. "Mason sent an email. He said we lied. He said he can't work with us. Do you know how humiliating that is? He is the best estate attorney in the city. Now we are blacklisted." "You shouldn't have lied to him," I said, tossing my bag onto the kitchen island. "You told him you owned the lake house. You don't?" "We were going to." My father spun around, pointing a finger at me. "That is the point. It was a formality. You were supposed to sign the deed over to the trust, and then it would be ours, and then everything would be true. It is just paperwork." "It is theft," I said. "It is stewardship," he yelled. "You are 34, you are single, you are one bad relationship or one lawsuit away from losing that asset. We wanted to protect it inside the family trust. We are the trustees. We keep it safe. You still get to use it. Why are you so selfish?" "Because I bought it," I said, enunciating every word. "I worked 80-hour weeks for 3 years. I paid the down payment. I pay the mortgage. I pay the insurance. It is mine." "And who raised you to have that work ethic?" my mother shot back, dropping the tissue to glare at me. "Who put a roof over your head for 18 years? Who paid for your braces? Does that equity count for nothing?" It was the same argument they always used. The invoice of existence. I owed them my adult life because they had successfully kept me alive during my childhood. Logan stepped forward. He put a hand on my shoulder. I flinched. "Harper, listen," he said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "You are right, okay? You are technically right about the money, but is being right worth destroying the family? Dad is in a bad spot. Mom is stressed. Just sign a quit-claim deed. Put the house in the trust. You know they won't actually take it from you. They just want the piece of paper. Just do it to keep the peace." I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw him clearly. He wasn't a peacekeeper. He was a human shield. He was asking me to set myself on fire so our parents wouldn't have to feel the cold. "No, Logan," I said. "Peace that requires my submission isn't peace. It is capitulation." "You don't understand," my father snapped. He had stopped pacing. He was standing very still, his back to me. "It is not just about the trust. We need that asset listed." The room went quiet. The air pressure seemed to drop. "What do you mean? You need it listed?" I asked. My father turned around. He looked older than he had 10 minutes ago. He looked desperate. "We have arrangements," he mumbled. "What arrangements?" I pressed. My mother looked away. Logan looked at his shoes. "We are buying into a franchise group," my father said, his voice gaining a sudden, fake bluster. "A very exclusive investment opportunity, passive income. It is going to secure our retirement and your inheritance." "And?" I asked. "And to qualify for the buy-in tier we want, we had to show a net worth of $2 million in unencumbered real estate assets," he said. I felt the blood drain from my face. "You don't have $2 million in real estate," I said. Their primary home was mortgaged to the hilt. I knew that because I had helped them refinance it 5 years ago. "We do if we count the lake house," my mother whispered. I stared at them. The horror of it washed over me in a cold wave. "You promised my house as collateral?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You used my home to qualify for a loan?" "Not a loan," my father corrected quickly. "A proof of funds. We just needed the trust document to show the partners. Look, here is the Cedar Ridge property, unencumbered, in the Callahan Family Trust. That is all they needed to see. Once we are in, the dividends will pay for everything. It was a bridge. Harper, a simple bridge." "And what happens if the buy-in fails?" I asked. "What happens if you default on whatever terms you signed?" "It won't fail," he shouted. "It is a sure thing. But now, because of your little stunt with Mason, we don't have the trust document. The partners are asking for the verification by Friday, tomorrow. If we don't produce the trust document showing the house is ours, the deal falls through. We lose the deposit." "How much is the deposit?" I asked. Logan closed his eyes. $50,000, my father said. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound that hurt my throat. "So that is what this is. You didn't just want to control me. You sold me. You bet my house on a business scheme without even telling me, and now you are mad because I won't sign the receipt." "We are doing this for you," my mother cried, standing up and reaching for me again. "The profits. They are for the whole family." "Get out," I said. "Harper," Logan started. "Get out!" I screamed. The sound tore from my throat, raw and animalistic. "Get out of my apartment. Get out of my life. If you don't leave in 10 seconds, I am calling the police and reporting you for trespassing." My father looked at me with pure hatred. "You are an ungrateful, selfish child. I hope that house rots around you." "It might," I said, "but it will be my rot." They left. My father stormed out. My mother followed him while throwing a tragic look over her shoulder, and Logan lingered for 1 second, looking like he wanted to apologize, before fear of our father pulled him out the door. I slammed it shut and locked the deadbolt. Then I engaged the chain. Then I wedged a chair under the handle. I sank to the floor, shaking violently. They had leveraged me. They had used my name, my credit, my hard work, as a prop in a financial gamble I knew nothing about. If I had signed those papers, if I had let Mason draft that trust, they would have handed the deed to some shadow investors the next day, and when their sure-thing franchise inevitably failed, I would have come home to a foreclosure notice on a house I didn't even know I had lost. I stood up. The tears were gone. The shaking stopped. I walked to my desk and opened my laptop. I didn't open my work email. I didn't check social media. I created a new folder on my desktop. I named it the Borrowed Life File. I started typing. Date: October 14th, 2021. Purchase of Cedar Ridge property. Date: today. Verbal admission by Grant and Evelyn Callahan that they attempted to fraudulently list said property in a trust to satisfy net worth requirements for a third-party investment. Witness: Logan Callahan. I was done being the daughter. I was done being the peacekeeper. I was now the plaintiff. I began searching for local business filings under my father's name. I needed to know who these partners were. I needed to know who thought they owned a piece of my house. The war hadn't just started. The enemy had just revealed their supply lines, and I was going to cut every single one of them. The laptop screen was the only source of light in my apartment. It was 3 a.m, and the coffee in my mug had gone cold hours ago. I was not sleeping. I was building a timeline. I had named the folder the Borrowed Life File, but as I started populating it, I realized it should have been called the Erasure. For years, I had told myself that my parents were just proud. I told myself that when they boasted about our lake house, they were using the collective "our" in the way a sports fan talks about their favorite team. We won the game. It was harmless. I thought it was affectionate. But looking at the glow of the spreadsheet now, I saw the pattern. It wasn't affection, it was annexation. I typed out the first entry, the summer solstice party, 2 years ago. I remembered it vividly. I had spent 2 weeks prepping the house. I had power washed the siding, restained the deck, and stocked the fridge with $300 worth of premium steaks and wine. My parents had invited their entire country club circle, people I barely knew, people who wore linen suits and laughed too loudly. I was in the kitchen, sweating over the oven, pulling out trays of appetizers, when I heard my father on the deck. The sliding glass door was open just a crack. "Grant, this place is spectacular," one of his golf buddies had said. "You really outdid yourself with this renovation." "Well, you know," my father had replied, his voice booming with false modesty. "Evelyn and I wanted a sanctuary, a place to gather the generations. It took some capital, sure, but for family, worth every penny." "And Harper?" the man asked. "Is she staying down here with you?" My father laughed. "Oh, Harper loves it. We let her come down whenever she wants. She is great at keeping an eye on things when we are wintering in Florida. Sort of a built-in property manager. Really, keeps her grounded." Property manager. I had stood there, holding a tray of crab cakes, freezing in the heat of the kitchen. I wasn't the owner. I wasn't the host. I was the help. I had walked out onto the deck, smiled, served the food, and said nothing. I had let him strip me of my title because I didn't want to embarrass him in front of his friends. I typed it into the file. Incident. Publicly demoted to property manager. Witnesses, 12. My reaction? Silence. I moved to the next entry, the month of August, last year. My parents had asked to use the lake house for a quiet getaway. I was busy with work in the city, so I gave them the code. They stayed for 4 weeks. When I finally went down on Labor Day weekend to check on the place, the air conditioning was set to 65 degrees with the windows open. The lights were all on. The refrigerator was empty except for a bottle of ketchup. On the counter sat the electric bill. It was for $450. I had called my mother. "Mom, the electric bill is huge. You guys left the AC running with the windows open?" "Oh, stop pinching pennies." "Harper," she had sighed. "We are family. The house is a family asset. What is a few $100s between us? Just pay it from the house account." There was no house account. There was my checking account. I typed that in too. Incident. Financial abuse disguised as family sharing. Cost. $450 plus wear and tear. Then I started pulling the hard data. I logged into my bank portal and downloaded 5 years of statements. I opened the folder for the lake house and started summing up the columns. Property taxes for the last 3 years, $18,400, paid by Harper Callahan. Homeowner's insurance, $4,200, paid by Harper Callahan. Roof repair after the hailstorm, $9,600, paid by Harper Callahan. New floating dock installation, $12,000, paid by Harper Callahan. Security system installation and monthly monitoring, $2,500, paid by Harper Callahan. I looked at the total. It was a staggering number. It was the price of a luxury car. It was the price of my freedom. And nowhere, not once in those 5 years, did the name Grant or Evelyn Callahan appear in the credits column. They hadn't paid a dime, not for a shingle, not for a light bulb, not for a tax assessment. They had contributed nothing but noise. I realized with a sickening clarity that my silence had been the soil in which their lies grew. Every time I didn't correct them, every time I paid a bill they generated, every time I let them play Lord and Lady of the Manor while I scrubbed the toilets, I was validating their delusion. I had trained them to treat me this way. I had taught them that I was a resource to be mined, not a person to be respected. My phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating against the hard wood. It was Logan. I stared at the screen. My brother. The man who stood in my doorway and asked me to sign away my rights to keep the peace. Logan, Harper, please, Mom hasn't stopped crying. Dad is saying he's going to have a heart attack. Is this really worth it? Family is all we have. If you sue them or expose this, you destroy everything. What do you actually get out of this? I looked at the cursor blinking on my screen. I looked at the columns of numbers. I looked at the grantee, Harper J. Callahan line on the digital copy of my deed. What did I get? I picked up the phone and typed a reply. I didn't hesitate. Harper, I get the truth. I hit send, then I blocked his number. I wasn't done. The borrowed life file was just the preparation. Now I needed a weapon. I closed the spreadsheet and opened my contacts. I scrolled past the family friends, past the estate planners, past the mediators. I stopped at a name I hadn't called in 2 years, not since I needed a contract review for a hostile vendor dispute at work. Tessa Langford. Tessa was a partner at Ridgway & Coates Legal Group. She wasn't nice. She wasn't warm. She didn't have pictures of her kids on her desk. She had framed verdicts. She was a litigator who treated the law like a scalpel, cold, sharp, and used to cut out the rot. I looked at the time. 7 a.m. She would be in the office. I dialed. Langford, she answered on the first ring. Her voice was crisp, like tearing paper. Tessa, it is Harper Callahan. I need to hire you, immediately. Harper, she said, her tone shifting slightly, recognizing a repeat client. Good morning. Is this regarding the logistics contract again? Did they breach the non-compete? No, I said. This is personal, but it involves real estate, fraud, and potentially identity theft. Go on, she said. I could hear the click of her unlocking her computer. I took a breath. I didn't cry. I didn't whine. I gave her the bullet points, the lake house purchase, the deed in my name, the meeting with Mason Hargrove, the attempt to put my house in a trust without my consent, the admission that they had used my property as collateral for a franchise buy-in, the years of publicly claiming ownership. I spoke for 10 minutes straight. Tessa did not interrupt me once. When I finished, there was silence on the other end. And you have the deed? Tessa asked. Yes, and the settlement statement, and the wire transfer confirmation. And you have proof they represented this as their asset to third parties? My brother witnessed the admission, and I suspect the franchise partners have documents my father provided. Tessa exhaled. It was a long, slow sound. Harper, listen to me very carefully, she said. Her voice had dropped the casual professional tone and entered a zone of deadly seriousness. You need to stop thinking of this as a family dispute. You need to stop thinking about Thanksgiving dinners and birthday cards. This is not a misunderstanding. I know, I said. No, I don't think you do, she corrected me. If a stranger did this, if a stranger tried to deed your house into their trust, or used your address to secure a business loan, what would you call it? Theft, I said. Exactly, Tessa said. This is a conspiracy to seize assets. They were attempting to cloud your title. They were creating a paper trail to establish an equitable interest in a property they did not pay for. If they had succeeded in getting that house into the trust, even for a day, they could have encumbered it with debt, sold it, or tied it up in litigation for 20 years. She paused, letting the weight of that sink in. I am going to send you a retainer agreement, Tessa continued. I want you to sign it and return it within the hour. Once you do, all communication goes through me. If your father calls, you hang up. If your mother shows up at your door, you call the police. If your brother texts you, you forward it to me. Do you understand? I understand, I said. Good, Tessa said, because we are not going to mediate this. Harper, we are going to nuke it. We are going to secure your title so tightly that they won't be able to look at that lake without needing a lawyer present. That is what I want, I said. One more thing, Tessa added, her voice softening just a fraction. Prepare yourself. They are going to escalate. Narcissists do not go quietly when you cut off their supply. They will attack your character. They will reinvent history. They will try to make you look like the villain. They already have, I said, looking at the spreadsheet of bills I had paid in silence for half a decade. But this time, I have the receipts. Send me everything, Tessa said. I'll see you in court. I hung up the phone. The morning sun was just starting to cut through the blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time in years, the apartment didn't feel lonely. It felt like a fortress, and I was finally manning the walls. The conference room at Ridgway & Coates was nothing like Mason Hargrove's plush, mahogany-paneled office. It was glass, steel, and terrified me with its sterility. The table was white. The chairs were ergonomic mesh, and the view outside looked down on the city traffic like a judgment from above. Tessa Langford did not offer me coffee. She offered me a roadmap to war. We are moving from a defensive posture to an offensive one, Tessa said, pacing the length of the room. She was wearing a charcoal suit that looked sharp enough to draw blood. Mason Hargrove firing them was a warning shot. That gave them a bruise. Now, they are going to come back trying to break a bone. We need to reinforce your position before they file. She slapped a legal pad onto the table. I need a timeline, she commanded. Not just a list of dates. I need a forensic reconstruction of your ownership. I want every single interaction regarding that house documented. Every text message where you discussed repairs. Every email where you sent them the gate code. Every time they asked for permission to visit. If they asked for permission, they acknowledged your authority. Find those instances. I have the borrowed life file, I said, opening my laptop. Good. Make it bigger, she said. And Harper, I want 3 backups. 1 on your physical hard drive, 1 in a cloud service they have absolutely no way of guessing the password to, and 1 printed out, hard copy, in a fireproof box. If this gets ugly, digital files have a way of disappearing or being accidentally deleted if someone guesses a security question. They don't know my passwords, I said. They know your mother's maiden name and the name of your first pet, Tessa countered. Change everything, today. She turned to the whiteboard and uncapped a red marker. Witnesses, she wrote. We cannot rely on family. Family is messy. Judges hate he said, she said family drama. We need disinterested third parties. Who knows you own that house? I thought about the last 3 years, the solitary weekends fixing the deck, the early mornings dealing with contractors. The neighbors, I said. Mr. Henderson next door. He saw me power washing the siding for 3 days straight while my parents sat on the porch drinking lemonade. Put him on the list, Tessa said, writing Henderson. Who else? The dock management company, I said. Cedar Ridge Marine Services. I had a dispute with them last year about the slip fees. I went to their office personally. I signed the new lease. My check pays the annual dues. Perfect, Tessa said. Business records are harder to argue with than feelings. Who fixes the place when it breaks? Miller Roofing, I listed. And the local HVAC guy, Old Man Reynolds. I have the invoices. Get me affidavits from all of them, Tessa said. I want statements saying they took instructions from you, received payment from you, and regarded you as the sole decision-maker. We are building a wall of reality that your parents cannot climb over. Tessa capped the marker and looked at me. Here is what is going to happen next. They are going to hire a litigator, not an estate planner like Mason, a shark, and they are going to argue equitable interest or constructive trust. What does that mean? I asked. It means they will claim that even though your name is on the deed, there was an unwritten family understanding that you were just a placeholder. She explained. They will say they provided guidance, or cash that was off the books, or that the house was intended for the family trust all along, and you are just a rogue agent stealing it. But that is a lie, I said. It is a story, Tessa corrected. And in court, the best story wins unless the evidence kills it. We need to kill it. I hesitated, then pulled up a file I hadn't shown anyone yet. I have the camera logs, I said. Tessa raised an eyebrow. Explain. I installed a ring system and outdoor cameras the week I bought the place, I said. I have the activity logs for the last 3 years. It shows every time the front door was opened. but more importantly, it shows who opened it. I turned the screen toward her. I have a unique user code. My parents have a guest code. The logs show that 70% of the time, I am the one on site. But look at this. I pointed to a date from last summer. Here, my father texted me asking for the code because he forgot it. I texted it to him. If it was his house, why would he need me to grant him access? Tessa smiled. It was a terrifying expression. That is not just evidence, Harper. That is a smoking gun. Print it. Certify it. 2 days later, the first mortar shell landed. A courier arrived at my office, my actual workplace, and dropped a thick envelope on the reception desk. It was marked personal and confidential, but the return address was stamped in bold, aggressive font. Ashbourne and Associates, attorneys at law. I took it to the privacy of my car before opening it. The letter was signed by Derek Ashbourne. I looked him up on my phone. He was known in the legal community as the Bulldozer. His website featured photos of him looking like he was about to punch the camera. The letter was a masterpiece of fiction. Dear Ms. Callahan, we represent your parents, Grant and Evelyn Callahan, regarding their equitable ownership interest in the property located at Cedar Ridge Lake. It has come to our attention that you have recently attempted to assert sole dominion over this family asset, in direct contravention of the verbal and implied agreements made at the time of purchase. Your parents have provided significant intellectual capital, management services, and financial support toward the acquisition and maintenance of this home. Your refusal to transfer the title to the Callahan Family Trust constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty and unjust enrichment. You are effectively embezzling the family inheritance. We demand that you immediately execute a quitclaim deed transferring the property to the trust within 48 hours. Failure to do so will result in immediate litigation for constructive fraud, and we will seek full damages, including legal fees and emotional distress. I felt sick. Embezzling. Unjust enrichment. They were twisting my hard work into a crime. I scanned the letter to Tessa. She called me 5 minutes later. Do not panic, she said. Her voice was calm, almost bored. This is a standard intimidation letter. Ashbourne charges $500 an hour to write these. He's trying to scare you into submission so he doesn't have to actually do any work. It says I am embezzling, I said, my voice shaking. He can say you are an astronaut. It doesn't make it true, Tessa said. We are going to respond, but we aren't going to defend. We are going to attack. That afternoon, Tessa sent our response. It was 3 pages of pure distilled aggression. We didn't offer a quitclaim deed. We demanded proof. Mr. Ashbourne, your client's claims are patently false and defamatory. My client, Harper Callahan, is the sole legal owner of the property. Regarding your assertion of financial support, please provide, within 7 days, 1. Copies of any canceled checks or wire transfers from your clients to Ms. Callahan or the title company. 2. A full accounting of any management services billed and paid. 3. A complete copy of the client intake form your clients provided to Mason Hargrove, specifically the section where they disclosed the true legal ownership of the property. That last point was a trap. We knew they had lied to Mason. If they produced the form, they admitted to perjury or fraud. If they refused, they looked guilty. Derek Ashbourne didn't wait 7 days. He didn't send the proof. He filed the lawsuit. On a Tuesday morning, I was served with the summons. Grant and Evelyn Callahan ver. Harper Callahan. They were suing me. My own parents were suing me in Superior Court. They were asking for a declaratory judgment, stating that I held the property in a constructive trust for their benefit. They wanted the court to strip my name off the deed and replace it with theirs. Okay, Tessa said when I brought the papers to her office. She flipped through the complaint. They pulled the trigger. Now we nuke the site. What do we do? I asked. We file a counterclaim, Tessa said. We don't just say no. I didn't. We sue them back. We are filing for slander of title. By filing this frivolous lawsuit, they are clouding your title and damaging the value of your asset. We are also filing for abuse of process and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She looked up at me. And we are asking the court to make them pay every single cent of your legal fees. We are going to make this so expensive that they will have to mortgage their actual house to pay for the one they are trying to steal. We spent the next week drafting the pleadings. I felt like a ghost in my own life. I went to work, I ate, I slept, but my mind was constantly churning through the legal arguments. Then came the call that stopped my heart. It was Friday. Tessa asked me to come in. Urgent was the only word in the subject line of her email. When I walked in, Tessa wasn't pacing. She was sitting at the head of the table, looking at a document on her screen with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was confusion mixed with disgust. "Harper, sit down," she said. I sat. "What happened? Did Ashbourne respond?" "They filed an amendment to their complaint this morning," Tessa said. "They attached an exhibit, evidence they claim supports their family agreement." She spun the laptop around. On the screen was a scanned PDF of a piece of notebook paper. It looked old, slightly crumpled. The text was handwritten in blue ink. I, Harper Callahan, hereby acknowledge that the funds used to purchase the Cedar Ridge property are a loan from my parents, Grant and Evelyn Callahan, and that I am holding the title in my name solely for their convenience until the family trust is established. Dated November 1st, 2021. And at the bottom, there was a signature. Harper J. Callahan. I stared at the screen. The room seemed to tilt sideways. "I didn't write this," I whispered. "Look closer," Tessa said. I leaned in. The handwriting looked vaguely like mine, the way I wrote when I was in high school. Maybe, but the signature, the loop on the H, was too wide. The slant was wrong. It was a caricature of my signature. "I have never seen this piece of paper in my life," I said, my voice rising. "Tessa, I didn't write this. I didn't sign this. This is fake." "I know," Tessa said, "because November 1st, 2021, you were in Chicago for a logistics conference. We have your flight records and your hotel receipt in the timeline you built." I looked at her, the realization crashing down on me. "They forged it," I said. "They actually sat down, wrote a fake confession, forged my signature, and submitted it to a court of law." "Yes," Tessa said. She closed the laptop, her eyes cold as ice. "And that is the mistake that is going to bury them. This isn't a property dispute anymore. Harper, this is a felony." She reached for the phone. "I am calling a forensic document examiner," she said. "We are going to prove that ink isn't from 2021, and when we do, Derek Ashbourne isn't just going to lose this case. He's going to be looking at a disbarment hearing if he knew about it. And your parents? They are going to be looking at a prosecutor." I sat back in the mesh chair, staring at the blank whiteboard. I had expected them to lie. I had expected them to gaslight me. I had expected them to sue me. But I never expected them to frame me. The borrowed life file was no longer enough. I needed a new folder. I needed a folder for criminal evidence. "Do it," I told Tessa. "Test the ink." The document lay on the conference table under the harsh fluorescent lights of the forensic lab, sealed inside a plastic evidence sleeve. I stared at it until my eyes burned. It was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, the kind you could buy at any drugstore for $3. On it, written in blue ballpoint ink, was a confession I never made, signing away the rights to the home I had built my life around. "It looks like my handwriting," I said, my voice sounding hollow in the small, sterile room. If I saw this quickly, without thinking, I might even believe I wrote it. "That is the point of a good forgery," Dr. Vance said. He was a forensic document examiner Tessa had flown in from Chicago, a man who looked more like a surgeon than an artist. He adjusted his glasses and pointed to the monitor connected to his microscope. "It is designed to pass the glance test, but handwriting is not just about shape, Miss Callahan. It is about rhythm, it is about speed, and most importantly, it is about pressure." Tessa stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching the process with the intensity of a hawk circling a field mouse. She had spent the last 48 hours gathering the control samples. I had given her everything: my passport from 5 years ago, the mortgage documents I signed in wet ink at the closing, canceled checks from 2020, and even a birthday card I had sent to Logan 3 years ago. We have 35 distinct samples of your genuine signature spanning a 4-year period, Dr. Vance said, pulling up a split-screen image. On the left was the confession note my parents had submitted to the court. On the right was my signature from the deed. Look at the H, Dr. Vance instructed, tapping the screen. When you write your H, you use a single, fluid downstroke. You are fast. Your hand knows the muscle memory. The pressure is heaviest at the top and tapers off at the bottom. He zoomed in on the forged document. The blue ink looked like a mountain range under the magnification. Now look at this one. See the microscopic tremors in the ink line? See how the pressure is uniform all the way down? This is what we call drawing, not writing. The person who wrote this was not executing a signature. They were copying an image. They were moving slowly, hesitating, checking their work against a reference. It is a simulation. Can you testify to that? Tessa asked, her voice cutting through the technical jargon. I can testify that there is a 99% probability this signature was not produced by the same hand as the control samples, Dr. Vance said, but that is not the smoking gun. He turned off the microscope and walked over to a large, boxy machine in the corner of the room. It hummed with a low, electronic vibration. We ran a video spectral comparator analysis on the ink, he said, and we also did a chemical dating test using a solvent extraction method. This is where your parents made a fatal error. I felt my heart rate spike. What did you find? The document is dated November 1st, 2021, Dr. Vance said, picking up a report from the printer tray. The ink used is a standard Bic ballpoint blue. However, ink manufacturers change their chemical taggants periodically to track batches and prevent exactly this kind of fraud. He handed the report to Tessa. She scanned it, and for the first time since I had met her, a genuine, terrifying smile spread across her face. You have got to be kidding me, she whispered. What? I asked, stepping closer. The specific chemical composition of this ink, Dr. Vance explained, contains a resin binder that was not introduced into that brand's production line until January of 2023. I did the math in my head. They dated the note 2021, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. But they wrote it with a pen that didn't exist until 2 years later. Exactly, Dr. Vance said. It is an anachronism. It is impossible for this document to be genuine. It was created recently, likely within the last few months, and backdated to fit their narrative. I looked at the plastic sleeve on the table. It wasn't just a lie anymore. It was a trap they had built for themselves, and they had just stepped right into the teeth of it. This is it, Tessa said, looking up at me. This is the end of the civil case, and it is the beginning of something much worse for them. We didn't file the expert report immediately. Tessa wanted to let Ashbourne, my parents' aggressive lawyer, sweat a little longer, but word must have leaked. Or perhaps Ashbourne was smart enough to realize that a handwritten note appearing out of thin air was a liability he didn't want to stake his career on. 2 days after the lab results came in, Ashbourne called Tessa. I was in her office when the call came through on speakerphone. Tessa, look, Ashbourne's voice was different now. The bluster was gone, replaced by a weary, conciliatory tone that sounded like a car salesman trying to explain why the engine fell out. We have been reviewing the file. My clients are emotional. They are elderly people who just want to secure their family legacy. They feel that perhaps the litigation route is too aggressive. You sued us, Derek, Tessa said, leaning back in her chair and examining her fingernails. You filed a suit claiming my client was an embezzler. That feels pretty aggressive to me. Water under the bridge, Ashbourne said quickly. Look, we are prepared to offer a settlement structure. We will drop the suit for a declaratory judgment. We will acknowledge Harper's title. In exchange, Harper drops her counterclaims for slander of title and abuse of process. We sign a mutual non-disparagement agreement, seal the court records, and everyone goes their separate ways. No harm, no foul. No harm? I whispered to myself. Tessa looked at me. She muted the phone. It is a walk-away offer, she said. They surrender. You keep the house, but they get to hide what they did. The forgery never becomes public record. They don't pay your legal fees, and you can never talk about this again. I thought about the borrowed life file. I thought about the humiliation in Mason Hargrove's office. I thought about the forged signature that tried to turn me into a liar in the eyes of the law. If I signed that agreement, I would be giving them exactly what they always wanted. The appearance of perfection. They could go back to their country club and tell their friends that they let me keep the house. They could spin the story. No, I said. Tessa unmuted the phone. Harper declines, she said. Tessa, be reasonable, Ashbourne snapped, his patience fraying. If we go to trial, it is going to cost everyone $50,000. Why drag this out? Because we have the ink analysis. Derek? Tessa dropped the bomb. Silence. Absolute, dead silence on the other end of the line. What ink analysis? Ashbourne asked, his voice tight. The one that proves the document your client submitted, dated 2021, was written with ink manufactured in 2023. Tessa said, We know it is a forgery. We can prove it is a forgery. And unless you want to be named as a co-conspirator in a fraud on the court, I suggest you think very carefully about your next move. Ashbourne hung up. I didn't have time to enjoy the victory. An hour later, my phone vibrated. It was Logan. I hadn't spoken to him since the night I kicked them all out of my apartment. I had blocked his number, but he was calling from a school line. I debated ignoring it, but I needed to know what their reaction was. I answered. Harper? His voice was shaking. He sounded like he was hyperventilating. What do you want, Logan? You have to stop, he said. Mom is hysterical. She says you are trying to send them to jail. She says you are vindictive. I am not trying to send them anywhere, I said calmly. I am defending myself against a lawsuit they filed. They forged my signature. Logan, did you know about that? I didn't look at the papers. He stammered. He was lying. I could hear it in the hesitation. Look, it doesn't matter. They are desperate. Dad told me to tell you. He said if you don't drop the counterclaim, they are going to release the file. What file? I asked. Everything, Logan said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He said he is going to tell everyone about the time you got suspended in college. He is going to tell your boss about the anxiety medication you took 5 years ago. He said he will paint you as mentally unstable. Harper, he will ruin your reputation in the industry. He said he has emails. He has photos. I felt a cold chill run down my spine, not of fear, but of disgust. They had kept a dossier on me. All those times I confided in them, all those moments of vulnerability I shared with my mother. They weren't listening as parents. They were gathering ammunition. Is that the message? I asked. Harper, please, Logan begged. Just stop. You know how they are. They will burn it all down. Let them, I said. What? Tell them to go ahead, I said, my voice steady and hard as steel. Tell them to release whatever they have, because here is the difference. Logan, my bad stories are mistakes I made and learned from. Their bad stories are felonies they are currently committing. Harper, they need those stories to cover a crime, I interrupted. I don't need to hide anything. And Logan, if you call me with a threat again, I will add your name to the witness list as a co-conspirator. I hung up the phone. I sat there for a moment, breathing in the silence of the office. They were terrified. They were lashing out like cornered animals, and that meant we were close to the kill. Tessa walked back in with a fresh stack of papers. Ashbourne isn't withdrawing, she said. He is trying to distance himself, claiming he submitted the document in good faith based on his client's representations. But he is stuck. He can't quit in the middle of a fraud allegation without looking guilty. What is next? I asked. We go to the source, Tessa said. The forgery is the weapon, but the motive is in the trust office. She handed me a draft of a subpoena. We are subpoenaing Mason Hargrove, she said. Can we do that? I asked. Isn't there attorney-client privilege? Privilege covers legal advice, Tessa said, a predatory glint in her eyes. It does not cover the commission of a crime. It is called the crime-fraud exception. If they used Mason's services to further a fraudulent scheme, like claiming they owned a house they didn't, or preparing false documents to secure a loan, the privilege is pierced. She tapped the paper. Mason is a reputable lawyer. He ran away from them the moment he smelled smoke. If we depose him, if we get his intake notes where they explicitly lied about the title, we prove intent. We prove that the forgery wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. We prove it was a calculated Plan B because Plan A failed. Do it, I said. I already sent it to the process server, Tessa replied. Mason Hargrove is going to be our star witness. And your parents? They are about to find out that the only thing stronger than family loyalty is a lawyer protecting his own license. Courtroom 3B was smaller than I expected. Smelling of floor wax and old paper, it lacked the dramatic mahogany grandeur of the movies, substituting it with fluorescent lighting and the dull beige reality of the municipal justice system. My parents sat on the left side of the aisle. They were dressed for a country club brunch. My father in his navy blazer with the brass buttons, my mother in a pastel cardigan that screamed harmless grandmother. Derek Ashbourne sat beside them, but I noticed he had positioned his chair a few inches further away than usual, creating a subtle physical distance between his suit and their desperation. My lawyer, Tessa Langford, sat next to me. She was a statue of calm. On the table before her wasn't a messy pile of papers, but a single, thick binder with color-coded tabs. It was the borrowed life file, weaponized and ready for deployment. All rise, the bailiff droned. Judge Marlene Sutter swept into the room. She was a woman who looked like she used sandpaper to exfoliate. Her hair was cut in a severe gray bob, and her eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses were sharp enough to cut steel. She didn't look at us. She looked at the docket. Callahan versus Callahan, Judge Sutter read, her voice dry. Motion for declaratory judgment and counterclaim for slander of title. Let us proceed. Ashbourne stood up. He adjusted his tie, trying to summon the bulldozer energy he was famous for, but it faltered under Judge Sutter's gaze. Your Honor, Ashbourne began, his voice booming slightly too loud for the small room. We are here to correct a familial oversight. My clients, Grant and Evelyn Callahan, are the equitable owners of the property at Cedar Ridge Lake. While the deed is technically in the daughter's name, this was a constructive trust arrangement. The family understood, everyone understood, that Harper was merely holding the title for the benefit of the family unit. We have photographs of family gatherings. We have testimony regarding the emotional investment. Mr. Ashbourne, Judge Sutter interrupted, not even looking up from her file. I am looking at a motion regarding real property title. Emotional investment is not a recognized form of currency in this court. Do you have a contract? A transfer agreement? A trust instrument? We have a verbal understanding, Your Honor, Ashbourne said, sweating slightly, and a history of usage. We also have a document, Ashbourne added, glancing nervously at Tessa, a handwritten acknowledgement of debt and intent, which we submitted into evidence as Exhibit A. Sit down, Mr. Ashbourne, Judge Sutter said. She turned her gaze to our table. Ms. Langford. Tessa stood up. She didn't speechify. She didn't wave her arms. She simply opened the binder. Your Honor, the defense disputes the existence of any constructive trust. We assert that this is a simple case of a fee-simple owner being harassed by individuals who wish to seize an asset they did not pay for. Tessa pulled out the first tab. To support this, we present the chain of title, the deed, recorded October 14th, 2021, lists Harper Callahan as the sole grantee. There are no other names. She flipped the page. Regarding the plaintiff's claim of financial contribution, we present Exhibit B. This is a comprehensive ledger of every single expense associated with the property for the last 5 years. Property taxes totaling $18,400, paid by Harper Callahan. Insurance premiums of $4,200, paid by Harper Callahan. A new roof, $9,600, paid by Harper Callahan. Tessa looked directly at my parents. My father was staring at the table, his jaw working furiously. My mother was clutching a handkerchief, looking at the judge with wide, tear-filled eyes, trying to make contact, trying to charm. We also present the digital footprint of the property, Tessa continued, her voice relentless. Exhibit C contains the security logs from the smart lock system. These logs show that the plaintiffs requested access codes from the defendant on 12 separate occasions. One does not ask permission to enter one's own home. Judge Sutter was flipping through the binder Tessa had provided to the bench. She was nodding, a slow, rhythmic motion that signaled she was following the money. "This is compelling regarding the financial reality," Judge Sutter said, "but Mr. Ashbourne has submitted a document, Exhibit A, purportedly signed by your client, acknowledging that the home is held in trust." The room went silent. This was the moment. Tessa didn't flinch. She picked up the plastic-sleeved report from Dr. Vance. "Your Honor," Tessa said, her voice dropping an octave, forcing everyone to lean in. "We vehemently deny the authenticity of Exhibit A. My client did not write it. My client did not sign it. And thanks to science, we know that reality itself does not support it." "Explain," Judge Sutter said, leaning forward. "The document is dated November 1st, 2021, Tessa said, holding up the report. "It is written in blue ballpoint ink. We retained Dr. Vance, a forensic document examiner, to analyze the ink composition." Ashbourne shifted in his seat. I saw him glance at his watch, as if wishing he could fast-forward time. "The chemical analysis reveals that the ink used to write this 2021 document contains a specific resin binder," Tessa continued. "This binder was not introduced into the manufacturing process by the pen company until January of 2023. A gasp didn't run through the room. It was too tense for that. Instead, a heavy, suffocating vacuum seemed to suck the air out of the space. "Are you telling me," Judge Sutter asked, her voice dangerously quiet, "that this document was written with a pen that did not exist on the date it was allegedly signed?" "That is exactly what I'm saying, Your Honor," Tessa said. "It is a physical impossibility. It is a forgery created ex post facto to manufacture evidence for this lawsuit." Judge Sutter stared at the report. Then she looked at the document in question. Then she looked at Derek Ashbourne. "Mr. Ashbourne," the judge said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Did you knowingly submit a forged instrument to this court?" Ashbourne shot up out of his chair as if it were electrified. "Absolutely not, Your Honor. I submitted the document in good faith based on the discovery provided to me by my clients. I had no reason to doubt its authenticity until this moment." He was throwing them to the wolves. He was saving his license. Judge Sutter turned her eyes to the plaintiff's table. She didn't look at them like they were elderly parents anymore. She looked at them like they were defendants. "Grant and Evelyn Callahan," she said. My father stood up. His legs looked shaky. My mother remained seated, weeping softly into her hands. "Who produced this document?" Judge Sutter asked. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. "Who handed this piece of paper to your attorney and claimed it was 3 years old?" There must be a mistake with the testing." My father stammered, his face pale. "It was in our files. We have so many papers. Maybe we got the date wrong when we wrote it down later to replace a lost original." "So you are admitting you wrote it later?" Judge Sutter snapped. "No, I don't know." My father looked at Ashbourne for help, but Ashbourne was staring at the ceiling, effectively resigning from the case in real time. "Mrs. Callahan?" Judge Sutter addressed my mother. My mother looked up, her face streaked with mascara. "We just wanted what was best for the family," she sobbed. It is our house. We picked it out. Harper knows that. Why is everyone being so mean about a piece of paper? It was the most damning thing she could have said. She didn't deny the forgery. She minimized the crime. I looked back at the gallery. Logan was sitting in the back row, his head in his hands. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the floor, realizing that the peace he had tried to broker was actually a conspiracy he had almost become a part of. Judge Sutter closed the file. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "I have heard enough," she said. She removed her glasses. "The evidence presented by the defense regarding ownership is overwhelming, documented, and irrefutable. The evidence presented by the plaintiffs is anecdotal at best and fraudulent at worst. I am granting the defendant's motion for declaratory judgment," Judge Sutter ruled. "The court affirms that Harper J. Callahan is the sole fee simple owner of the property. The plaintiffs have no legal or equitable interest in the home." She paused, and her eyes narrowed. "Furthermore, regarding the counterclaim and the submission of Exhibit A, this court takes a very dim view of parties who attempt to weaponize the justice system with manufactured evidence. I am dismissing the plaintiff's claims with prejudice." "But, Your Honor," my father started. "Silence," Judge Sutter barked. "I am also granting the defendant's request for attorney's fees," she continued. "Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, you will pay every dime of Ms. Langford's bill, and you will be grateful that is all you are paying me." She picked up the plastic sleeve containing the forged note. "However," she said, her voice turning icy, "I cannot ignore a prima facie case of perjury and evidence tampering. A forgery submitted to a court is not a family misunderstanding. It is a crime." My mother stopped crying. She froze. "I am referring this matter, specifically the origin and submission of Exhibit A, to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into fraud and perjury," Judge Sutter declared. "Mr. Ashbourne, you will cooperate fully with that investigation if you wish to remain in good standing with the bar." "Yes, Your Honor," Ashbourne whispered. "We are adjourned," Judge Sutter said, banging the gavel. The sound rang in my ears. It was the sound of a heavy door slamming shut on my past. My parents didn't move. They sat there, stunned, as the reality of what had just happened crashed into them. They hadn't just lost the house. They hadn't just lost the lawsuit. They had lost their immunity. I stood up. Tessa closed her binder with a satisfying snap. "Come on," she said to me, not even glancing at the other table. "We are done here." As we walked down the aisle, I passed Logan. He looked up at me, his face pale and terrified. "Harper," he whispered. "They are going to charge them?" I didn't stop walking. "I didn't forge the note. Logan, they did?" I walked out of the courtroom doors and into the hallway. My father was already shouting at Ashbourne inside the room, his voice muffled by the wood. My mother's wails were rising again. But out here, in the hallway, it was quiet. "You did good," Tessa said, checking her watch. "I will draft the order for the fees. You go home. Change your locks again." "I will," I said. "And Harper?" Tessa said, pausing by the elevator. "Don't answer the phone." "I won't," I promised. I walked out of the courthouse alone. The sun was shining, bright and indifferent. I took a deep breath. It didn't taste like victory. Victory is supposed to feel happy. This felt like survival. It felt like I had just cut off a gangrenous limb to save the body. It hurt, but for the first time in years, the infection was gone. The parking lot outside the courthouse was a vast, gray expanse of concrete. But for my parents, it might as well have been the edge of a cliff. I watched from the safety of the vestibule doors as they crumbled. For 34 years, I had watched Grant and Evelyn Callahan operate with the impenetrable armor of the family. They used their status as parents like a riot shield, deflecting logic, boundaries, and accountability. But out there, in the cold wind of a Tuesday afternoon, that shield had evaporated. Derek Ashbourne did not walk them to their car. He stopped abruptly near the bike rack, his briefcase clutched tight against his chest. I couldn't hear the words through the glass. but the body language was violent in its finality. Ashbourne shook his head, a sharp, cutting motion. He pointed a finger at my father, not in a friendly way, but in the way one points at a liability. He handed my father a thick manila folder, effectively returning their file, and then he turned on his heel and walked rapidly toward his own vehicle without looking back. Ashbourne was a shark in civil court, but he knew the difference between a lawsuit and a crime scene. He wasn't going to let his license get splashed with the blood from a forgery investigation. My phone buzzed. It was Tessa, standing right beside me. "He just withdrew," she said, watching the scene with clinical detachment. "He is smart. He knows the district attorney doesn't send demand letters. They send indictments." "What happens to them now?" I asked. "Now the clock starts ticking," Tessa replied. "The judge's referral isn't a suggestion. The DA's fraud unit will open a case file by tomorrow morning. They will subpoena the original document. They will interview Dr. Vance, and your parents are going to realize very quickly that the hourly rate for a criminal defense attorney who handles white-collar fraud is about double what Ashbourne charges." I watched my parents standing alone on the sidewalk. My mother was gripping my father's arm, looking around wildly as if waiting for an audience to sympathize with her. But there was no audience, just the uncaring machinery of the legal system they had tried to manipulate. The days that followed were a blur of cold, hard reality. The narrative my parents had spun for years, that I was the irresponsible one, the one who burned money, the one who needed their financial stewardship, inverted itself with dizzying speed. Through the grapevine of gossiping aunts and cousins, I heard the numbers. They had to retain a specialist from a firm downtown, a man named Sterling who required a $25,000 retainer just to open the file. I sat in my apartment, paying my mortgage, paying my electric bill, paying my insurance, completely solvent and secure. Meanwhile, the financial geniuses who wanted to manage my assets were liquidating their retirement accounts to stay out of prison. But panic makes people dangerous. 3 days after the hearing, the harassment began. It wasn't subtle. It started with voicemails. "Harper, pick up the phone. You are destroying this family over a misunderstanding. Harper, your mother is sick. She can't eat. If anything happens to her, it is on your hands. Harper, we can fix this. Just tell the judge you made a mistake about the ink. Tell them you bought the pen later. Fix it." I didn't answer. I forwarded every single audio file to Tessa. Then, they showed up at my office. I was in a meeting with a shipping vendor when the receptionist buzzed in, her voice tight with nerves. "Ms. Callahan, your parents are in the lobby. They are shouting. Security is asking if they should call the police." I felt the blood drain from my face, not from fear, but from a profound exhaustion. They were bringing their chaos into the one place where I was purely myself, purely professional. "Tell security to escort them out," I said, keeping my voice steady for the benefit of the vendor. "And tell them if they return, we will press charges for trespassing." I watched from the second-floor window as 2 uniformed guards escorted my father out of the building. He was red-faced, gesturing wildly, screaming something at the glass doors. My mother trailed behind him, looking small and defeated. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel the ha-ha moment that revenge movies promise. I just felt a strange, cold clarity. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Harper the daughter. I was Harper the plaintiff. I was a separate entity, defined by my own boundaries, and they were just people who had broken the law. It was like waking up from a 30-year fever dream. "We need a protective order," Tessa said when I called her 10 minutes later. "They are escalating. They are trying to intimidate a witness in an active criminal investigation. That is another felony, by the way." "Do it," I said. "I want them away from me. I want them away from my job. I want them away from my house." The temporary protective order was granted 24 hours later. It was a piece of paper, but it was heavier than the deed. It legally mandated that Grant and Evelyn Callahan stay 500 feet away from me at all times. It barred them from calling, texting, emailing, or contacting me through third parties. Except for one third party. I asked Tessa to leave a specific loophole in the communication channel regarding my brother, Logan. Logan had been silent since the courthouse. He hadn't sent the threatening texts my father had demanded. He hadn't shown up at the office. He was the weak link in their chain, and I knew the pressure on him must be excruciating. On a Friday evening, I sent one message to Logan. I have a protective order against Mom and Dad. If they contact me, they go to jail. But I am willing to talk to you, one time, alone. If you want to know how to save yourself from going down with the ship, meet me at the coffee shop on 4th and Grand, 10 o'clock tomorrow. He was there at 9:45. Logan looked 10 years older than he had a month ago. He was wearing a wrinkled hoodie, and his eyes were rimmed with red. He sat in the corner booth, nursing a black coffee, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. I bought my own tea and sat across from him. I didn't smile. I didn't ask how he was. "Are they going to prison?" Logan asked immediately, his voice a hoarse whisper. "That depends on the district attorney," I said. "Forgery is a Class C felony, perjury is another one, and since they did it to try and steal a property worth over $500,000, the attempted theft charges are significant." Logan put his head in his hands. "They are losing their minds. Harper, Dad is drinking at 10 in the morning. Mom just sits in the dark. They keep saying you tricked them." "I didn't trick anyone," I said. "I just refuse to be tricked." I leaned forward. "But I didn't come here to talk about their feelings. I came here to talk about you." Logan looked up, fear flashing in his eyes. "You were the messenger, Logan," I said. "You passed on their threats. You tried to coerce me into signing the quitclaim deed. You were in the room when they discussed the forgery. Technically, that makes you a co-conspirator." "I didn't sign anything," Logan protested, his voice cracking. "I didn't know about the fake note until court, I swear." "But you knew about the scheme," I countered. "You knew they were trying to take my house, and you helped them apply pressure." Logan looked at the door, as if calculating his running speed. "However," I continued, "I haven't given your name to the DA yet, not as a target. I can keep you out of the primary indictment line, Logan, but only if you tell me the absolute truth right now." "About what?" "About the why," I said. "Why were they so desperate? Dad mentioned an investment, a franchise. He said he needed the trust to show proof of funds, but that doesn't make sense. If it was just an application, he could have just walked away when I said no. He wouldn't have risked a felony forgery unless he was backed into a corner." Logan went pale. He looked down at his coffee cup, his hands trembling. "Tell me," I commanded. Logan took a shaky breath. "It wasn't an application. Harper, it wasn't a potential deal." "What do you mean?" "They had already signed the contract," Logan whispered. I felt a chill go through me. "What contract?" "The franchise agreement," Logan confessed, the words tumbling out now that the dam had broken. "They signed it 3 months ago. It is a terrifying contract. Harper, it has a performance guarantee. They had to pledge $2 million in assets to secure the financing for the build-out." "They don't have $2 million, I said. "I know," Logan hissed. "That is why they needed your house. They listed the Cedar Ridge property on the schedule of assets before they even spoke to Mason Hargrove. They lied to the lenders. They claimed the house was already in the family trust." My mind raced, connecting the dots. It wasn't just about control, it was about survival. They had committed bank fraud months ago. "So when Mason asked for the deed," I started. "They panicked," Logan said. "They had 30 days to produce the title documents to the lenders to finalize the loan. If they didn't produce the proof that the house was in the trust, the lenders would call the default." "And what happens if they default?" I asked. Logan looked at me, his eyes wide with the horror of it. "There is a confession of judgment clause," he said. "If they defaulted on the proof of collateral, they didn't just lose the deal, they are personally liable for the breakage fee." "How much is the breakage fee?" I asked. Logan swallowed hard. $250,000. I sat back in the booth, stunned. The picture was complete. They hadn't just tried to steal my house because they were narcissists. They tried to steal it because they had gambled with money they didn't have and lost. They needed my equity to plug a $250,000 hole they had dug for themselves. They were going to use my house, I said slowly, to cover a debt they had already incurred, and if the business failed, the bank would have taken my home. Yes, Logan whispered. That is why they couldn't stop. That is why they forged the note. They are terrified of the bank. Harper, the breakage fee is due next week. I looked at my brother. He was weak, yes. He was complicit, yes. But he was also just another casualty of their greed. Does the DA know this? I asked. No, Logan said. Nobody knows. Just them, and me, and now you. If the DA finds out they used the forged document to try and satisfy a bank fraud scheme, I said, that upgrades the charges. That is federal territory. That is wire fraud. That is bank fraud. Logan reached across the table, grabbing my wrist. Harper, please, if they go to federal prison, they will die in there. They are old. I pulled my hand back. I didn't feel pity. I felt the weight of the borrowed life file in my mind, expanding to include this new, dark chapter. I won't tell the DA about the bank fraud today, I said, standing up. I will let the forgery investigation take its course. But Logan, you are going to go home, and you are going to pack your bags. Why? Because when that breakage fee comes due next week, I said, and they realize they can't pay it, and the bank comes for their actual house, you don't want to be in the blast radius. I picked up my purse. Go home, Logan, save yourself, because I am done saving any of you. I walked out of the coffee shop. The wind was colder now, but I didn't button my coat. I needed to feel the chill. I needed to feel the reality of it. My parents weren't just bad parents. They were bad criminals. And they were about to learn that in the real world, you can't gaslight a bank statement. I took out my phone and called Tessa. We need to update the file, I said. I just found the motive. Is it good? Tessa asked. It is catastrophic, I replied. They didn't just want the house. They had already sold it. The conference room at the district attorney's office was even more sterile than Tessa's. The walls were a depressing shade of government beige, and the air smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic fatigue. I sat on one side of the scratched laminate table, Tessa next to me. Across from us sat Assistant District Attorney Marcus Thorne, a man who looked like he hadn't slept a full 8 hours since law school. Here is the situation, Thorne said, sliding a thin file across the table. We have the forensic report on the ink. We have the testimony of the document examiner. We have the deposition from Mr. Hargrove regarding the false statements made during the trust intake. It is a slam dunk for forgery in the second degree and attempted grand larceny. He paused, tapping a pen against his chin. However, the defendants have no prior criminal record. They are in their late 60s. If we go to trial, a jury might hesitate to send 2 retirees to state prison, even with the evidence. It is the sweet old grandparents' defense. Juries hate sending grandma to jail. They aren't sweet, I said, my voice flat. And they aren't grandparents. I know that, and you know that, Thorne said. But the taxpayers don't like funding trials that can be resolved with a plea. So, here's the deal we are offering. They plead guilty to 1 count of felony forgery and 1 count of filing a false instrument. In exchange, we recommend 3 years of probation, full restitution of your legal fees, and a permanent criminal record. No jail time? I asked. Suspended sentence, Thorne clarified. If they step out of line, if they violate probation, if they contact you, they go inside for 2 to 4 years, but for now, they stay out. I looked at Tessa. She gave me a subtle nod. It was a good deal for the state. It saved them money and secured a conviction. But for me? It is not enough, I said. Thorne looked annoyed. Ms. Callahan, this secures a felony conviction. It destroys their reputation. It effectively ends their ability to secure loans or serve on boards. It is a significant punishment. I don't care about their reputation, I said. I care about the narrative. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper I had typed up that morning. I will agree to support this plea deal, I said, sliding the paper toward Thorne. But only if this is part of the allocution. They don't just plead guilty to the state's charges. They have to sign this. Thorne picked it up and read it. His eyebrows shot up. An admission of sole ownership and apology, he read. I want a separate civil stipulation, I explained. I want them to sign a document, under penalty of perjury, stating clearly that I am the sole owner of the Cedar Ridge property, that they never had any equitable interest, that the family trust narrative was a fabrication, and that they apologize for attempting to defraud me, and I want it notarized. Why? Thorne asked. The criminal conviction implies all of that. Implication isn't enough, I said. I want it in their own words. I want a document I can frame. If they sign this, I won't push for immediate incarceration. If they don't, I want you to take it to trial, and I will testify every single day until they are locked up. Thorne looked at Tessa. Is she serious? Deadly, Tessa said. Take it to Sterling. Tell him it is the only way his clients sleep in their own beds tonight. An hour later, their lawyer, Mr. Sterling, came back. He looked exhausted. My parents were in a holding room down the hall, likely realizing that the walls were closing in. They are resisting the apology, Sterling said, sitting down heavily. They are willing to sign the ownership admission. They are willing to pay the fees, which, by the way, are astronomical. $55,000? Really? That is what it costs to defend against a felony frame job, Tessa said sharply. The price is the price. They say the apology feels vindictive, Sterling said. They sent a message. They said, tell Harper to just stop. The family will be at peace if she just lets this go. We are already ruined. Why does she need us to beg? I laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. They still think they are negotiating from a position of power, I said. They think peace means my silence. Mr. Sterling, please go back and tell your clients that I am not interested in their version of peace. I am interested in the truth. They tried to steal my house to cover a gambling debt with a franchise lender. They tried to destroy my character to hide their own incompetence. I am not asking them to beg. I am demanding they confess. If they don't sign, Tessa added, we go to trial, and when the franchise lenders find out about the forgery conviction through a public trial, rather than a quiet plea deal, they will likely sue for fraud as well. This is their life raft. Sterling sighed. He knew we were right. He stood up and walked back down the hall. While we waited, my phone pinged. I checked it, expecting another harassing voicemail from a flying monkey relative. It was an email from Logan. The subject line was blank. I opened it. It was long, rambling, but about halfway down, the text shifted from his usual anxious dithering into something solid. I am moving to Denver next week. I didn't tell Mom and Dad. I can't be in that house when the bank comes for it. I can't watch them spin this anymore. I used to think you were being stubborn. Harper, I used to think you were breaking the family apart because you wouldn't share. But I realized something while I was packing my room. I was packing trophies from high school, and I wondered if Dad would claim he won those too. You don't owe anyone ownership of your achievements. You don't owe them the house just because they gave you a childhood. I am sorry I was a coward. I am sorry I held the door open while they tried to rob you. I hope you get what you want today. I don't think I will ever get what I want from them, which is just to be seen as a person and not an investment vehicle. I stared at the screen. You don't owe anyone ownership of your achievements. It was the sentence I had waited 34 years to hear. I realized then that this fight wasn't about the timber and glass of the lake house. It wasn't about the money, although the $55,000 in legal fees was significant. It was about authorship, for my entire life. Grant and Evelyn Callahan had held the pen. They wrote the story where I was the supporting character, the investment, the retirement plan. They edited out my hard work and pasted in their sacrifice. By demanding this document, I wasn't just winning a lawsuit, I was taking the pen back. The door opened. Sterling walked in. He didn't sit down. "They will sign," he said. We moved to a larger conference room for the formality. I insisted on being present. I needed to see it. My parents were already seated at the far end of the long table. My father looked gray, his skin hanging loosely on his face, the bluster completely gone. My mother was staring at her hands, which were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. They didn't look at me when I entered. Thorne placed the documents in front of them. "This is the plea agreement," Thorne said, "and this is the stipulation of facts and apology, as requested by the victim." My father flinched at the word victim. He picked up the pen. His hand was shaking. I watched as he signed the plea deal. Then he moved to the stipulation. He paused. He read the words I had written. "I, Grant Callahan, admit that I have no legal claim to the Cedar Ridge property. I admit that I fabricated the narrative of family ownership to secure personal financial gain. I apologize to my daughter, Harper, for the deceit and the damage caused to her reputation and financial security." He looked up. For a brief second, our eyes met. I looked for remorse. I looked for a father. But all I saw was a man who was angry that he had been caught. He hated me in that moment, not because I had done something wrong, but because I had stopped him from doing something right for himself. He signed it. He shoved the paper toward my mother. She signed it without reading it, tears dropping onto the page, staining the ink. "It is done," Thorne said, gathering the papers. "The court will ratify the sentencing recommendation on Monday. 3 years probation, restitution of $55,000 to be paid within 60 days, and a 5-year restraining order barring any contact with Ms. Callahan." "60 days?" my father croaked. "We don't have that kind of liquidity. The franchise deposit—" "The franchise deal is dead, Grant," I said. It was the first time I had spoken. "You have a felony record now. The lenders will pull the contract the moment the background check updates. You will lose the deposit. You will likely lose your own house to pay the breakage fees. But that is not my problem. That is the cost of doing business." My father stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "You are cold," he spat. "You are ice cold." "I learned from the best," I replied. I picked up my copy of the signed stipulation. I checked the signatures. They were real. No forgery this time. "Come on, Harper," Tessa said, guiding me toward the door. We walked out of the room, leaving them with their criminal defense lawyer and the ruins of their schemes. We walked down the hallway, through the security checkpoint, and out into the fresh air. I stopped on the sidewalk and looked at the document in my hand. It was just paper and ink, but it felt like a shield. "So," I said, looking at Tessa, "it is over." "The legal fight is over," Tessa said. "They are felons. You are the owner. The restraining order will keep them away physically. The debt will keep them busy financially." She looked back at the courthouse. "You know," Tessa said, her voice thoughtful, "I see a lot of these cases. Usually, people cave. They settle because they are afraid of losing the relationship. They think family is a magic word that excuses everything." She turned to me, her eyes sharp and approving. "But you figured it out," she said. "Family is not a skeleton key. Harper, it doesn't unlock every door you want to close, and it certainly doesn't give them the right to rob the house." I folded the document and put it in my bag, right next to the deed. "No," I said, "it doesn't." I looked at my watch. It was 2:00. I had a conference call at 3. I had a mortgage payment due on the 1st. I had a life to live. And for the first time, it was entirely undeniably mine. "I am going to buy a bottle of champagne," I said. "And then I am going to change my locks one last time." "Good plan," Tessa said. "Send me the receipt. I will add it to their bill." The sun rising over Cedar Ridge Lake did not look like fire today. It looked like liquid gold poured straight from a crucible. The air was biting. A crisp October wind that cut through my flannel shirt. But I did not zip it up. I wanted to feel the cold. It felt real. It felt like a reminder that I was standing here, alive, solvent, and solitary. It has been 6 months since the gavel came down in Judge Sutter's courtroom. 6 months since my parents plead guilty to felony forgery. 6 months since the illusion of the Callahan family unit finally dissolved under the weight of its own lies. I stood on the deck I paid for, the deck I repaired, and listened to the sound of a power drill whirring in my hand. I wasn't building anything new. I was changing the locks. Again. It was a ritual now. Every 6 months, I replaced the hardware. It cost me $200 and an hour of work, but the psychological payoff was worth $1 million. As I slid the new brass deadbolt into place, hearing the satisfying click of the tumblers, I knew that no copy of a key existed in any pocket but mine. I walked back inside. The house was quiet. Not the heavy, loaded silence of a room where people are arguing without speaking, but the clean, empty silence of a sanctuary. I went to the kitchen island and opened my laptop. I pulled up the security system dashboard. I deleted the old user profiles, even the temporary ones I had made for the contractors. I set a new master code, a random string of numbers that had nothing to do with birthdays or anniversaries. Then, I went to the safe in the closet. I pulled out the thick, leather-bound binder that held everything: the forensic report on the ink, the court transcripts, the signed confession from my parents, and the restraining order. I placed it all into a heavy, fireproof metal box. I locked the box. Then I put the box back in the safe and spun the dial. I was closing the chapter. I wasn't forgetting it. I would never forget it. But I was archiving it. It was no longer my daily reality. It was just history. I walked back to the living room and picked up a thick envelope that had arrived yesterday. It was from a real estate agent in town. Inside was the deed to a small commercial building on Main Street, a little brick structure that used to be a bakery. I had bought it cash, $85,000. I planned to renovate it and lease it out to a local coffee shop. I ran my finger over the grantee line: Harper J. Callahan. There were no partners, no investors, no family help. It was clean. It was transparent. It was mine. Next to that envelope sat a letter on heavy cream-colored stationery. The return address was Hargrove Estate Planning. I opened it. Mason Hargrove had written to me personally. Dear Miss Callahan, I am writing to confirm that pursuant to your request and the court's findings, my office has permanently purged the intake file regarding your parents' attempted trust creation, save for the records required by the district attorney. I have also flagged their names in our internal system to prevent any future conflicts. I would also like to extend my personal apologies. In my 20 years of practice, I have rarely seen a client maintain such composure in the face of such intimate deception. You saved my firm from being party to a crime, and for that, I am grateful. I folded the letter. Mason was a good man who had been used as a tool, just like I had been. His validation felt like the final stamp of approval on my sanity. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I looked at the screen. It was a text from a number I didn't have saved, but I knew the area code. It was a Denver area code. Logan. My brother had moved out west 3 weeks after the plea deal. He had run away from the wreckage, leaving our parents to deal with the foreclosure of their home and the humiliation of their probation. I opened the message. It was a photo, a blurry picture of a newborn baby wrapped in a blue hospital blanket. Logan, he was born last night. His name is Noah. He has your eyes. Harper, I know things are broken, but do you want to meet your nephew? He is innocent in all this. I stared at the image, a tiny, innocent life, a fresh start. The old Harper, the Harper who craved connection, the Harper who kept the peace, would have replied instantly. She would have booked a flight. She would have sent a gift. She would have thought, maybe this is how we heal. But I wasn't that Harper anymore. I knew how the cycle worked. Access to the child would become a leverage point. First, it would be photos. Then, it would be visits. Then, it would be requests for help, because babies are expensive and Logan was starting over, and eventually, the toxicity would seep back in through the crack in the door. I typed my reply. I didn't use anger. I used boundaries. Harper, he is beautiful. Logan, I wish him a healthy, happy life. You focus on taking care of your family, and I will focus on taking care of my life. I hit send. Then I deleted the thread. I turned back to my laptop. The folder named the borrowed life file was still on my desktop. I right-clicked it and selected Archive. Then, I created a new folder. I named it The True Ledger. This wasn't a file for defense. This was a file for construction. I dragged the scan of the new commercial deed into it. I dragged my investment portfolio into it. I dragged my travel itinerary for a solo trip to Italy into it. I was building a life that couldn't be borrowed, because the foundation was made of truth. Then, I made one final phone call. "This is Harper Callahan," I said when the receptionist answered. "I am calling to confirm my appointment with Mr. Sterling." "Yes, Ms. Callahan," the voice said. "He is expecting you at 2 o'clock to finalize the signature on your trust documents." I smiled. It was the ultimate irony, the final twist of the knife. I was doing exactly what my parents had wanted to do. I was putting the lake house into a trust. But this wasn't a family trust designed to hide assets or defraud lenders. It was the Harper Callahan Revocable Living Trust. I had drafted the terms myself, with Sterling's help. They were ironclad. The trust documents explicitly stated that in the event of my death or incapacitation, my assets would be liquidated and the proceeds donated to a legal defense fund for victims of financial abuse. But there was a specific clause, Article 9. Article 9, Disinheritance. I specifically, intentionally, and with full knowledge, leave nothing to my parents, Grant and Evelyn Callahan, or to my brother, Logan Callahan. This is not an oversight. This is a direct consequence of their actions. Any attempt by these individuals to contest this trust shall result in the immediate forfeiture of any residual legal standing and the aggressive pursuit of legal fees by the trustee. I was locking the door from the other side. I was ensuring that even from the grave, they could never, ever touch what I had built. They wanted to control my assets? Fine. Now, my assets were legally weaponized against them forever. I walked out onto the deck again. The sun was higher now, turning the water from gold to a brilliant, blinding blue. I sat down on the top step of the porch, the wood warm against my legs. For years, I had thought that revenge meant making them scream. I thought it meant public humiliation, or shouting matches, or making them feel the pain they had caused me. But as I looked out at the peaceful water, listening to the wind rustle the trees, I realized I was wrong. Revenge isn't noise. Revenge is silence. Revenge isn't engaging in the fight. Revenge is ending the war by removing yourself from the battlefield. The deepest, most devastating revenge I could inflict on Grant and Evelyn Callahan wasn't the criminal record or the money they had to pay me. It was this, the absolute, permanent, impermeable wall I had built around my existence. They would wake up every morning in their rented apartment, wondering what I was doing. They would wonder if I was happy. They would wonder about the house, but they would never know. They were ghosts to me now, haunting a past I no longer lived in. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean, cold air. The lake house stood behind me, solid and strong. It wasn't a legacy. It wasn't a family gathering place. It wasn't a collateral asset. For the first time in my life, I didn't hear my father's booming voice claiming credit for the view. I didn't hear my mother's whining voice claiming ownership of the decor. I heard the wind, I heard the water, and I heard my own heartbeat, steady and calm. I was the owner, I was the author, and finally, the story was mine. Thank you so much for listening to Harper's story of reclaiming her truth. If you enjoyed this journey from betrayal to absolute justice, please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I love seeing our community grow across the world. Don't forget to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button, and hit the like button to help this story reach more people who need to hear that the truth is worth fighting for.